The most, one of the most interesting things, and Gwyn, we were talking about Gwyn earlier, the grammarian. One of the things that Gwyn points out, and it really struck me in his little book on grammar that made quite a splash, I think, in the UK. One of the things that he points out is that language, our English language, has not changed a great deal. I mean, the conservation of the language, because there's a lot of people, the descriptivist will just say that language is whatever people use. But there is a reason to hold on and to preserve language, because if we allow language to dissipate into private languages, we lose the ability to communicate as a culture or a civilization.
That is all true, but also equally true is the fact that language as we inherit it is not the product of a single person. It's the evolved gift of generations, and contained in every word there is a kind of history of the human condition. We're actually inheriting wisdom with language. These words make distinctions that we couldn't have ever made ourselves without their aid. And but we are entering a world where grammar is not given the importance that it deserves.
One of the things, for me, I mean, conserving language is extremely important, and it was an obsession of Muslims. The idea, the Quran, in essence, almost froze the Arabic language in a period. So the ideal of Arabic will always be the Quran, and in some ways the King James Bible did that to English to a certain degree.
Yes, it did. But interestingly, of course, the King James Bible is unashamedly a translation, and the Quran most Muslims don't accept that it can be exactly translated, because it has a perfection of its own. Of course, it was recited. I mean, you know more about this than me. It was recited long before it was written down, and then it had achieved a kind of statuesque quality that our Bible has never managed. But grammar. The grammar of the King James Bible is often quite unorthodox, and it's a very strange book, and it is the book that made our 17th and 18th century literature. There's no doubt about that.
Arguably, it's the book also that made some of the greatest orators in our civilization.
Yes.
I mean, Lincoln's reliance and dependence on the King James Bible was immense.
But hardly any church now uses it. My church, the Anglican Church, does use it. But only in certain little places, in villages or in high ceremonial occasions. I mean, for the most part, it's the New English Bible that has replaced it.
You went to grammar schools, and they've been largely, the attack on grammar schools has been amazing, because it's been seen as an elitist enterprise. And one of the things that struck me, I read a book by David Mulroy called The War Against Grammar. It was quite an eye-opening book for me, because one of the things that in teaching our students Arabic, it's very difficult because many of them have very little English grammar. And traditionally grammatical languages, I mean all languages are grammatical, but by that I mean a language that is almost impossible to understand without knowledge of grammar, like Arabic, because it's inflected and because the verbs are conjugated. And so if you don't have some understanding of that, it becomes very difficult. But David Mulroy makes this argument that in the 1960s, early 60s in the US, there was actually a movement to stop teaching grammar, and they saw it as very abusive to children. But what's interesting, he has something that I've replicated in several classes. On average, I'll take 50 students. I give them the opening sentence to the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary. To the end of that sentence, it's a sentence that has several subordinate clauses, and all I ask the students is identify the main point of this sentence. Now, these are college students. On average, out of 50 students, I'll get 2 or 3 that actually can identify the main clause. And so there's a type of higher illiteracy that the fact that grammar has been removed. And I think a restoration of language is the only thing. For me, the salvation of a civilization has to be predicated on the resurrection of the corruption of its language.
Well, I think you've actually touched on what the real essence of conservatism is there. You know, that there are things that the conservation of which is actually fundamental to understanding the world as it is.
Right.
And if you lose those things, like the rules of grammar, the habits of good speech, or good manners, the sense of what a legal solution as opposed to a mere bullying solution to a conflict might be, all those things we used to be taught to us as part of becoming an adult. If you lose those things, you're at sea in the world. And I think that's one of the things that most worries me about modern education. You refer to this movement in our schools to abolish grammar as elitist. It's absolutely true that grammar is elitist because it makes a distinction between the people who know it and the people who don't.
Right.
And that's the kind of distinction that we all need if we're to survive,
Right.
not only as a civilization, but as individuals too.
Right.
So this is where the real arguments for conservatism, in my view, should be based, not in the economic sphere at all, but in these fundamental cultural inheritances.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's one of the things that really troubles me. We had recently a professor, I think, down in Southern California at a major university, who was considered racist because he was demanding that the students use proper grammar. And so the minority students objected to that because they felt that it was
discriminatory.
It was discriminatory. And one of the things about in our culture, and I think the poor white people in this culture are also disenfranchised from a type of normative or conventional language. And I think it's very disempowering to do that.
Yes, of course. When I was at school, grammar school, I came from a poor background,
right?
You know, and we were our teachers, as their first instinct when they found that you were in some way handicapped by the language that you'd learned from your parents, was to take you in hand, give you the advantage which your family had not, so that you could catch up with the others.
Right.
And I think that's that idea of teaching, that you're actually lifting people up so as to be able to receive their inheritance. That idea has gone to a great extent. It's much more now that the teacher comes down to the level of the student.
Exactly, and this Pygmalion's a good example of that, because Shaw in Shaw's Pygmalion, and obviously there's a lot of irony and sarcasm in that, but the idea of the flower girl who speaks non-standard English, wanting to speak like a lady, to speak proper, as a way of upward mobility.
Yes.
And one of the things that Toynbee points out is that a civilization on its way out inverts that. So there's a vulgarization of the patrician class where they begin to speak
in profanities.
Yes. and become...
Yeah, unfortunately that is so, yeah. But I think we mustn't be too pessimistic about everything.
Okay.